Okay, welcome, friends. Now, in this series of humans' quest on Earth series, in this chapter of these series, we will be talking about mysticism, theology, and Sufism. In actuality, I am working on the philosophy of history. However, why are we talking about this in the first place? But in a seminar series called Human's Quest on Earth, we have to explain that first. Humankind has a consciousness and a mind from the moment they come to Earth, they start adapting to the world around them, and from their family and environment, they get some impressions and learn something. And then, in order to understand the events and give meaning to it, there are some methods they use, some disciplines. And I see it this way: some disciplines. So some try to understand through art, some through history. Some's a historian, and they use history. Another one is a scientist who uses the research methods of science and tries to reach the truth. Some through philosophy, and some through religious beliefs. Tries to understand the world. And among these, there's also the mystic experience, and what is called tasawwuf, Sufism, in the Islamic culture. There's that kind of a way of trying to understand and make meaning in the world. So we criticize these ways of giving meaning. We had started with, and then we started with historicism and scientism, a critic of that, and then a critic of pedagogy and philosophy and evaluation. And as a result, and also after making an evaluation of art, among these now there is theology and mysticism, which remains. And then we will go to the broad philosophy of history in our next speech, hopefully. And after taking a look at the philosophy of history, we'll continue thereon. So, as a philosopher of history, about history, about science, and these ways of giving meaning, this philosophy and art, what do you think about this? How do you evaluate them? Where do you put them? How much are they related with the truth? How much are they reliable and valid? We're going to talk about that. And after that, we're going to talk about the philosophy of history after all these disciplines. So let me frame it this way and explain why I have chosen this topic. Because already all these ways of giving meaning, it's evaluating these ways of meaning was necessary. And actually any member of a discipline looks at the world through the habits of that discipline, but may not be able to evaluate the discipline itself. Throughout the quest of humanity, everyone has a limited perspective. Humans is a limited being. Everyone looks at events from their own perspective, which they belong to, and this creates a professional deformation and blindness, and make them think and see everything from their own profession's perspective, and think that their profession is able to explain everything. in my opinion, of course, I talk about my opinions here. Maybe I have explained it in this or that way in another conference, but in my understanding, all these disciplines are not able to, are giving some portion of the truths, but cannot encompass the whole truth. It's not able to describe the whole truth. A scientist, or as for example the microphone that I'm holding or the camera, you can expect a scientist to invent something like TV or microphone, but you cannot expect something like that from a theologian. You cannot look at the Quran and find out how to make a TV. But I've seen that too. For example, Mr. says I may remember there was a Mehmet Emin bookkeeper. He had also written a book, and he showed me the book. And he claims that there's a scheme of how you can make a light bulb and TV in the Quran. He has stayed in Cairo for 15 or 20 years. His Arabic is good, okay, but you cannot learn from the Quran about light bulbs and TV in the Quran. It's absurd. So to see and evaluate everything from the point of perspective of theology or from philosophy, is this okay? Is this correct? Like, my criticism about the other disciplines has already been uploaded on YouTube. One of them has already been hacked, interestingly. So I will also have to refer to that one. It's about historicism and scientism. If you write my name as well, also the three youngsters have uploaded their own speeches on top of mine, and also they've written some responses to some guy that I don't even know, and neither do I know him nor do I need to respond to him, but they've done something like that and uploaded with the name of my own conference. But since I've already uploaded the other one, like my previous conference are already uploaded on YouTube, no need to refer to that. But today we're going to be evaluating theology and mystic experience. And if you want, you can go and look at the art criticism and science criticism on YouTube. First of all, let's talk about this as well. Why did they make something like this? In fact, perhaps 6 months or 1 year ago, someone wrote on Facebook about the historicism of Quran, and asked me what I think about it insistently, and I wrote a short text and shared it in a group. In fact, it's necessary to read that. It's good to read that. It's 1 page long. I would take it out and read it, but I have this habit of laziness. What is the point of reading something that's already been written before? I've written some things about that subject, as far as I understand. We had talked about it a little bit during our conversation about historicism. In the West, with the influence of Hegel, they tried to criticize the Bible's history. It's in Germany. It is an imitation of that, as well as everything else that we are copying from Europe. They've learned it from them, and let's apply it to the Quran, this historicism, which the Westerns applied to the Bible. So some people are showing themselves around as historicists, and some people are against them, and so on. They're discussing, they're arguing. And when they ask my opinion about that, about nobody understands about this issue. How can you understand this and decide to discuss the history of Quran? That's another issue. But what I'm trying to say is that this popular religious ideological discussions, my speech had nothing to do with the historical analysis of Quran, but they perceived it as such and placed it in that category somehow, and placed their video on top of mine. I'm not interested in that, and I'm also angry at that, and this was a very harsh reaction. You need to read that. If I can find it, I'll read it to you. So now the thing that I dislike is that people, it's religion, of course you're going to talk about this is what you believe in, but Islam has become something that has been talked a lot about in our times. The public is talking about, the intellectuals are talking about it, or theologians are talking about it, and it shouldn't be discussed so much. They have made it very diluted. Everyone is talking about it, and it's become something very displeasant. Everyone's like, it's a topic of discussion for everyone. It's something that shouldn't be spoken in such layman's terms, and the matter has lost its seriousness, and I don't like this fact, actually. I wish there was a high level discussion of theology, but no, there isn't. And it's very ordinary, and people think that the religion is such a simple matter, but it actually isn't. From many perspectives, it's beyond human capacity to understand. And let me say this too as well. This will be a little boring. I accept that this historicism criticism has already been mentioned before, but in order because it expresses my emotions well, I wanted to read it. So this is not the level in which it should be discussed, and even if it is discussed, then it will not do any good. And I'll add this, that theology and belief are two separate things. I'll come to that. Allow me to read this one page, and a boring page, but it will tell you what I'm trying to say in very well. So allow me to read this. They asked me about my idea about this historicism and Quran, and I've said what I wanted. So I'm gonna speak about these issues, but this is a very short summary. And this ideological discussion is very absurd and displaced. So I'm going to read this text. Somebody has asked, and I've written this answer. Mr. Gökhan has asked. Mr. Gökhan, now that you requested, I'm going to write my view about this shortly. In the West, they place Bible to a criticism of historical criticism, historicist criticism, and which is influenced by Hegel. Historicism existed before Hegel too, but Hegelianism has a lot of influence on the spread of historicism. For the Holy Book, there's a lot of truth in the criticisms of the Holy Book from the perspective of historicism, such that in the Old Testament is a compilation written by many different authors. It's a compilation. This criticism is right. As for the Bible, the Adolf Arnakel, what is Christianity? As he has written in that book, evangelism, so the coming of the Messiah, is the is a gospel giving good tidings of Christianity. That's why it was written. And 4 of them are canonized, but as well known, there are many other Bibles. The Gnostic, the Barnabas, the Thomas, which was the Thomas Bible, which was translated by Ahmet Yükselir into Turkish, and he had signed it to me. I read it. The Barnabas, and there are many Bibles. There are many Bibles, which I remember and I don't. So, gospel is not a revelation according to the Christian belief. These are the life and the sayings of Jesus, the rumors about them. Like the hadith books in Islam. Gospels are the word of God, because Jesus himself is considered God, because it's the Word of God. That's why it's called the Word of God. Because Jesus is the incarnation of God on earth. But Quran is a revelation to the heart of Muhammad by the Allah, according to Muslims. If we follow the same route they have done for the Bible, to do the same criticism to the Quran, like just as in the West, we will have skeptic attitudes here too. Historicism is not all about the criticism of holy books. Faith is a matter of heart, not a matter of the reason. It wouldn't be necessary to believe if it was about reason. Everybody would have accepted it. Sapiens nihil affirmat, quod non probet. Reason does not approve of things. Reason does not approve of things which are not proven, and if it is proven, it cannot be repudiated. We too have a theological tradition influenced by the Greeks that is based on science, but logic is based on the identity principle and does not accept contradictions. Inanimate things can change very slowly, and they are what they are, but even a single cell organism changes every moment. For living things, it cannot be said that it is what it is. Logical arguments cannot even explain a single cell organism. In actuality, the Aristotelian logic is based on our spatial perception, and it's a materialistic perception which ignores time. It's a materialistic logic. If you reason much, you will give up faith. Pierre Bayle, in his dictionary, says that reasoning is a rusting, oxidizing dust. Just as iron oxidizes, reason too oxidizes itself and destroys itself. Intellectuals suppose that they understand and know everything, but they do not have a deep deep knowledge, and they do not know logic either. Avicenna, in medieval times, had foreseen that Aristotelian logic was not sufficient and developed the modal logic. And logic has 40 different types. Which mode of logic are you going to use as an intellectual? So, the first and the most important logical principle of the law of the excluded middle and something is what it is not applicable to the world of animate beings, because animate beings change all the time. Living things change all the time. Logic is very useful in the physical world. Logic is very useful in physics, in the world of inanimate things. But we rely on logic, mathematics, and semantics for our success in the positive sciences. But in the world of living beings, human, historical, cultural, metaphysical, and theological issues, it is useless. Therefore, in matters of faith, reasoning is absurd. It's an interesting deduction. And it's a very harsh criticism of all those theologians. If in matters of faith it is absurd to reason. This is my opinion, of course. The explanation and discussion of this can take a very long time. The matter of faith is a matter of belief and tradition. It is not a matter of reason. No matter what other theologians think. However, in the early times when the discipline of theology was being formed, the Aristotelian logic was considered to be the indubitable source of truth and reality. It was considered to be the sole criterion of truth. However, today we know that there are a lot of different types of logic and theories of truth, some of which even the philosophers are not aware of. Especially for history, which is not related with science. Well, I'm a philosopher of history, right? So, especially for history, which is not totally unrelated with science and truth. While history is not science, but a very different discipline than science, but also very valuable, also very precious. However, I guess no one other than me understands this discipline in Turkey. What do you understand from such a discipline so that you will discuss the history of Quran with such little knowledge? You think about those rumors that you think you know about the history of Quran as truth.
Ben de cevap yazmış. Gökhan Bey diye birisi sormuş. Gökhan Bey madem talep ettiniz bu bahse dair görüşümü kısaca yazayım. Batı'da kitabı müstakilinin tarihsel tetkide tarih tesisi var. Gerçi tarihsel değil. Ama iletisi tarihsel yayınlatısından sonraya bulunan bir. Kitab-ı Mukaddes için yapılan tarihsel tesislerde epeyce hakikatleri var. Epeyce hakikatleri yok. Şöyle ki, şu anlamdaki ahlaki kompütasyon mahiyetinde bir söylemedir. Yani birçok farklı devlerden, farklı yazarlar tarafından kalem alınmış metinlerin bir verilmesi şeklindeki gençleri haklıdır. Türkler ise esasen adım anlatır, bazı Hristiyan kitabında gibi evangelizm, yani Mesih'in gelişini temsil etmek müjdeleme ve Hristiyanlık propagandası yapmak maksadına mağlup olarak yazmışlar. Ve böyle bir kilise senesi kaymaklarında malumunuzun üzere tanrısını çok yapmışlar. Gnostik bilgiler, Toma İncil ki bazı teorilerinde tarafından bir şeyde çevrildi, Merkez Yunan'ın oluşturuyor. Barbaros İncil ve diğerleri mağazadan gelen gelmeyen pek çok İncil var. Hristiyan itikadına göre İncil vahiy değildir. İnsanın yaşadıkları ve sözler İsa'nın, Hazreti İsa'nın yaşadıkları ve söylediklerine dair rivayetlerdir. İslam'daki hadis kitaplara gibi. İncil'lerin Cenab-ı olması bizzat İsa'nın Tanrı sayılması sebebiyledir. İsa'nın türü olması için Tanrı kelamı. Çünkü bizzat İsa Tanrı'nın insan biçiminde inkarnasyonu sayılıyor. Kur'an ise Hz. Muhammed'in kalbine vahyolunan Allah kelamıdır. Müslümanlara göre. Biz de aynı tarihsel metodu Kur'an'a tatbik edelim diye Batı'daki tarihselcilik ekolüne özenilirse biz burada reyi, şüpheci, fikri cereyanlara yol açar. Tarihselcilik Kitab-ı Mukaddes tenkidinden ibaret de değildir. Zaten iman gönül işidir. akil metotlarla ispatlanabilse inanmaya gerek olmaz. Herkes kabul etmek zorunda kalırdı. Zira Latinlerin dediği gibi sapıyan sihir aklıma topluluğun kover. Akıl ispat edilmeye gerekmez. Yani ispatlanan şeye ise itiraz edilemez. Eğer Yunan felsefesinden etkilenen akıllı bilgi kelam geleneği yok değil. Ama ve lakin mantık
However, a single cell organism can change at any moment. For animals, an animal cannot be said to be whatever it is. Logical reasoning cannot explain a single cell organism. In actuality, the Aristotle logic depends on space and time, understanding of our space and time, and disregards the change in temporality. And it's a materialistic logic, like the human logic. It's a materialistic logic. If you try hard to reason, if you reason a lot, you will give up faith. Pierre Bayle says in his book called Dictionary, reasoning is a dust that rusts. Just as the iron oxidizes, reason itself will eat itself out. Intellectuals think they can understand everything and they can know, but they do not have a real knowledge and they do not know logic. Anyhow, our master Ibn Sina, even in the Middle Ages, told and realized that Aristotle's logic was insufficient and developed model logic, and logic has more than 40 types. What kind of logical analysis can an ordinary intellectual make? So, the first law of logic, the identity, is not sufficient in the world of animate beings, because animate beings can always change. Logic and physics, logic is useful in physics in the material world. Logic is useful in physics, in the experimental sciences. We rely on logic, mathematics, and semantics. However, in the animate world, in the human, cultural, metaphysic world, it doesn't work. In the living world, in the human cultural and metaphysics, it doesn't work at all, and so it is absurd to reason in the human affairs. This is an interesting conclusion. All the scholastic philosophy and the theologists are included in this criticism. These are my own opinions. The discussion and explanation of this can last a long time, but these are my opinions. Faith is a matter of tradition and faith. It's not in the domain of reason. Although some Orthodox thinkers may think differently, but the Aristotelian logic is indubiously was thought of as the criterion of truth, but today we know that there are a lot of theories of truth, and some of them even the philosophers do not understand and know, especially in history, which is not related with sciences and reality. No relation whatsoever. So I'm a philosopher of history, so I should be like, he said, it's not related. Especially in history, which is totally unrelated to science. So history is not science, but it's very valuable. However, other than me, I believe that there's no one who can understand this discipline. So he says, nobody other than me understands this. So what can you understand from such a difficult discipline? According to so those things that you think are real about the Greek history, you believe they are true, but historicism is a larger issue, and some people consider this as historicism as a separate worldview. So if you want more information about this, it's better that you should go and listen to historicism and scientism, but you cannot listen to it right now because it is all hacked. Perhaps because of these things that I've written. So let me give you the link. You can watch the pedagogy conference as well. These are not things that intellectuals can discuss. And even if you're a philosopher, even if you're a big theologian, you cannot understand the whole ocean of wisdom. Even if you're a wise man, you cannot solve these puzzles. Because this faith is beyond human faith and reason. Human understanding and reason. Faith is not a matter of reasoning, it's a matter of heart. Don't try to understand everything because it's not possible. You're trying to grasp those things which you cannot get at. So human mind can understand sciences, experimental sciences, but logic, mathematics, and semantics, so these can be understood by the reason, the natural sciences. It's totally useful, and all of the successes of civilization depend on this reason and logic. But about society, about morality, and about such arts and aesthetics and similar stuff, so even with a living organism, it starts to fail. Because the identity collapses when it comes to explaining the organism. Not even a single cell organism, because it's always changing. It becomes something else. So how can you explain human history? It's full of paradoxes. Something is either true or false. It cannot both be true and false. The laws of the excluded middle. The law of the excluded middle. Aut semel, aut iterum. The law of the excluded middle. So you say that the third option cannot be true. It's either true or false. It cannot be both true and false. Something cannot be both existing and non-existing. It is what it is. So that's the identity principle, the law of the excluded middle. The other logical laws also come out from this. I'm not going to logic right now, but for example, the greatest physicist of the 20th century, Heisenberg. So my photocopy translation is bad. I told Mr. Nevi to bring it to me. Because it has a really bad Turkish translation. Using some strange unexisting words. So our people doesn't even speak Turkish properly. So Werner Heisenberg, do you know what he says about the third law, the identity principle, law of the absolute middle? Because he's discussing physics and philosophy. There are matters of theology. It's not just about matter. When you go deeper, everything becomes connected. And then he says, I'm gonna try to remember what he said. This law of the absolute middle doesn't work in the quantum mechanics. It's okay in the classical physics. In logic, logic works in that area, but when it comes to quantum physics, it doesn't work. And even in physics, logic is not useful. If you go deep down to quantum physics, microphysics. So it works in the daily life to make a car work or make a plane fly, to make the computers work. This logic is very useful and it's very util, but there are things that are contradictory to this logic. Things that do not even include the lamb. Those things that are related in the microphysics. We are beginning to use those tools that use these kind of physics. So the MR with quantum computers now, for example, has been put in use. That's a completely different issue, very deep. You cannot discuss about that in the confines of a conference. You can make it, but it's going to be very superficial. It requires lengthy volumes. In Physics and Philosophy in Heisenberg in 1972. Aristotelian logic doesn't work in the quantum physics, let alone the human world or theology or mysticism and other areas. Even in the physics issues in quantum physics and natural sciences, it starts not to work well. Some of these things depend on quantum physics principles, and which cannot be resolved with the Aristotelian logic. There are many types of 40 types of logic model and other types of logic. So science may have its own vision of the world. But we mentioned it last time. It's a positivist and materialistic view. A scientist. Not that I haven't written about these things. But a scientist, what can he say about matters of theology? He's an atheist, theist, or something. But these are beyond what you can discuss. This is not in your area of understanding. Because you're using a scientific method. You can just measure material. You can understand material matters, but you cannot go beyond that when it comes to spiritual issues. So, do not discuss issues which you cannot understand. But what does the theologian say about this? Once upon a time, Ahmet Yüksel Özemre gave a conference in Islamic Research Center. I asked him to give a conference. the theologians started speaking and interrupting during this conference. And very impertinently, they tried to teach him physics. He's a physics professor. He's the head of the Atomic Research Center in Turkey. He's got a lot of physics books. A theologian starts teaching physics to a physics professor. So, Mr. İlber gave a talk on Palestine issues, and they started teaching him history. So do not teach historian history, and do not teach the physicists physics. You are a theologian, and that's what you understand. But that's not what happens. Everybody thinks. They, with their professional blindness, they believe they can understand the whole of truth, the whole of existence, all of creation, even if he knows that even if he realizes that he looks at it from his professional perspective and he evaluates it from that perspective. We went to a dinner recently with the invitation of a psychiatrical professor's invitation. They started, diagnosing me psychiatrically. So he started prescribing me a pill of depression. So people, because of their professional windows, they look at it from their own profession's window perspective. So let's not identify religion with theology, unlike theologians. Religion is a belief, and even religion, like there's religion and religion. Henry Bergson, when he wrote in one of his books, there's a dynamic religion and static religion. Dynamic religion is the mystics' religion, the Sufis' religion. The static religion is institutionalized historical understanding. Traditionalized. Bergson prefers dynamic religion, of course. If you say it within our terminology, it's tasawwuf, the mysticism. He likes those mystics and he criticizes static religion. If it was me, I would have done the same. But the static religion in an article I wrote about the state's political actions to have been alienated, and static religion is a form of the alienation of our spiritual affairs. It was a newspaper article, and I'm kind of strange too. So I said stuff like this in a newspaper article. I prefer dynamic religion, but I am also aware that it has alienated forms. In the struggle with religion and state will eventually lose. That's another issue. That's a conclusion you can discuss whether it's true or not. Before the separation of economics, state and religion, when I came to the conclusion that religion is the alienated form of our spiritual activities, what I'm trying to say is that, of course, with the environment around us, with the universe around us, there's a metaphysical, mystical connection, according to everyone's capacity. However, as far as we understand, as far as we know, religion, other than this psychological, emotional side, much more heavily, is a social institution. Religion is a cohesive function for a society in order to keep people together as a society. And what is it called? It's social cohesion. to unite people around the mission. This is why it's the raison d'être of religion. So there are really, prophets of some religions. There are, of course, some religions without prophets, but in our Islamic tradition, there are like many prophets. God has sent prophets to many societies. Semitic prophets and Israeli prophets. The religion has a social aspect. They insist on not understanding it. Many theologians insist. Yeah. And that's why it has an alienated form. It's an alienated form of our spiritual activities. This side of the religions is a big problem. So these Sufis are a completely different world. I will try to address that issue within the specifics of a conference, but confines of a conference. When was it? Somebody translated the Sufism article and it was printed in the Selçuk University. So if you write Sufism and Şahin Uçar, you will be able to find it. He was a good Orientalist. He was a good Orientalist. He knew the Islamic history well. For someone who looks from outside, he had a more objective evaluation. He had the opportunity to make a more objective evaluation. Because a Muslim, if he lives in a Muslim society, a Muslim environment, if you were raised in that environment, your circumstances and other conditions may make you look at Sufism with antipathy or sympathy, but it doesn't matter if you are a theologian or a Sufi, you have to take a side, realize it or not. And Muslims are not really interested in these matters. They are both very seemingly interested, but they don't even know what La ilaha illallah means. Nobody even knows that. I don't know how they are Muslims, but they don't know what it means. An ordinary Muslim, if he considered that valid for the majority of our country, but well, a Muslim should at least know the meaning of La ilaha illallah. You don't have to study religion in order to know this, right? That's another issue. How well can you know an ordinary Muslim? But for those who are interested, you have to take a side. You may like Sufism or not. For example, there are some theologians consider a lot of mystics heathens, unorthodox. For example, Mevlana. So they take a side. In traditional sense, or in a different way. Traditional or mystic, so they take a side. However, it's like an 8-10 pages article. It's a short, concise article. And no, I translated especially because I do agree with the conclusions in that article. So people speak even if they are theologians or not. And just because they are theologians, it doesn't mean they have a high understanding. They can also be shallow. But when talking about these issues, they take on characteristics of their environment. They take those arguments, they take aside, but someone who looks from outside has a better evaluation. Orthodox people, Orthodox interpreters and mystics have both advantages and disadvantages and faults and errors, wherein they err in both sides. So he criticizes. So I can also give examples, but that will be like branching it too much. Don't want to digress and stray. What I want to do is general criticism. Let's stick to that frame. If you find that article, Sufism and Şahin Uçar, on internet, Gibbs, you can find A.R. Gibbs criticisms. It exposes the matter well. But a lot of people knowingly or unknowingly talk about these issues of Sufism. People talk about it, but even theologians, I don't like any of what they say. What you speak about is just scholasticism, or Middle Ages scholasticism. You do not understand religion, and there is no big, great theologian in the Islamic world. Not like Ghazali or others. They are in the Middle Ages. One of the greatest problems of the Islamic world today is that they do not have a serious, high-level theological man of understanding, so they have to go back to the medieval ages too. But they lived in the medieval ages and they spoke in the medieval tongue, for the medieval circumstances. The Moloch and Khalifate. I said this also in the issues of philosophy of history. There are, unfortunately, today in the Islamic world, we do not have great Islamic theologians. Although they had, in the medieval times, they had much less capacity and, conditions were much worse, but today they don't even understand the level of the medieval times. So they discuss even the trivial matters today, and they do not understand the medieval scholars. A great man of understanding in the medieval ages wrote a book about different sects. I couldn't remember it at the moment. Religions and sects. Yes, let's respect people's specializations and everything, but not in the level of Shehristani. We haven't seen a theologian who discusses it in that level. Even crowds would laugh at that. Nobody would take them seriously. I do not. They speak very simplistic, simple stuff. They may help the masses or something, but I do not care about that. But the high-level theology is not existent in the modern times. I haven't heard in the Islamic. It existed in the medieval ages. Some great men existed in the medieval ages. That's one of our greatest problems today in the Islamic world. When I look at it as a historian, since the time of Fatih, the conqueror, we degraded even worse. So we are talking about a dead civilization of Islam that died 1500 years ago. Unfortunately, there's a side like that. Some people talk about resurrection, but I don't know if the dead will resurrect. If civilization can be reinstigated, it's not easy to do that. A culture should be born out of a religious vision, not according to your own will, not just because you wanted to. You cannot create a civilization just like that, as the intellectuals suppose. Now, theology, even the matters of theology, should be separated from religion, such that theology, or theology, which means, well, theos, God, so whatever. A theologian does not have to be a member of the religion he is evaluating, examining. So Einsmas, for example, I've got a book of his. He explains all the religions of the world. Of course, he doesn't know. He is not a member of all those religions. It just, because a Christian theologian doesn't have to be Christian, or a Muslim theologian doesn't have to be, like, Islamic theologian doesn't have to be Muslim. So if you believe something, you will accept it without further questioning. So that's why you cannot look at it objectively. There's a paradox like that in theology as well. So those people who were like great people, Al-Biruni, they even named a university after him recently. Biruni. He examined the Indian religion. He lived in the Ghazni times, and he examined the Indian culture, history, and religion. But Biruni was one of the greatest geniuses that all history has ever seen. Perhaps one of the few select personages in history. One professor, for example, in TTC, the great teaching company in the Eastern intellectual traditions, said, for example, that Al-Biruni is probably the greatest intellectual of the human history. So he's not an ordinary historian, he's not an ordinary scientist. He's one of the greatest, so one of the greatest of the human history, one of the greatest in the Islamic history. If you count 20 people in the world history, he will definitely be in that list, and he will be perhaps on the top. So when it's like that, he can evaluate the Indian religion and culture and everything. It can be understood that he can be so good in doing that. But an ordinary theologian, when talking about religion, or even talking about a different sect in his religion, or different understandings of that religion, for example, mysticism, how much objectivism can he hold? He will take a side. He will have to be on the side. And for even, why should only one religion? So he should examine all the religions, and there are some religions without a god, like Buddhism. It's not like our religion. Our religion is a religion of revelation. Gabriel revealed the word of God to Muhammad, and his companions memorized. But there's also this fact that this is a matter of faith. So God usually uses a medium like Gabriel, but there are also beliefs that he spoke with God directly. Excuse me if there's a mistake in translation here. There are some religions with no gods. Let me tell you about the adventure of history a little bit. Religions have 50 or 60,000 years old, but human history is 200 or 300 years, 1,000 years old. Shamanism, the burying of the dead, the respect for the dead. So it's interpreted that way. Animism, shamanism, these primitive tribe religions, faiths, is as old as 50,000 years, as minimum. And there's, of course, from our own religious perspectives, from a Muslim theologian, the first person was Adam, and he was Muslim. So that's how they accept it. So when you look at it from this perspective, it doesn't match the historical knowledge, historical understanding. So Adam might be symbolizing the beginning of agriculture. Some people may interpret it that way. So if you exclude the belief that you have to say like God is one and Prophet Muhammad is his only prophet, is his prophet, you will not be a Muslim. You will be, you cannot be considered a Muslim. So there are discussions of this. There are, of course, some unorthodox views in the past. This interpretation. In Islam, there is no specialization as in Christianity. There is no authority, like in the Christianity, and you don't have to be approved by that authority, like in the church. If you believe in God and Muhammad, this is enough, sufficient to be a Muslim. And this is that kind of an understanding of religion, like that kind of religion. But Judaism, and both Islam and Christianity is born out of Judaism. There are a lot of parallels. There's a lot of parallels with Christianity because they are all Israeli, being Israel, like sons of Israel. There was also monotheism before Moses and Abraham. The first understanding of monotheism was Abraham. However, it was called Musaviism, Moses, and the Mount of Sinai. That's the Old Testament with God. That it is based on that. And then there's a New Testament. So the in legal terms, it's the contract with God. So the Jewish people in the time of Moses made a contract with God. That's why testament with God, and that's why Jews consider themselves special. The alt. And the New Testament is Jesus, right? And Quran, the Holy Quran is 600 years later. And Prophet Moses, when he received the 10 commandments on the tablets, so there are 10 orders on the tablets, as you know, on the stone, cast on the stone. It's based on 10 commandments, the contract that the Jews made with the God. So in our Islamic tradition, there's also something like that. We are Muslims since Qalu Bela, when they said yes. So what does that mean? Since the creation of universe. And God asked them, am I not your God? And they said, yes. That's what it means. Qalu Bela means they said yes when God asked them, am I not your God? Before the universe. However, the institutionalized what is called a testament. There was a box that included these tablets. It was lost, but so there are 2 tablets containing 10 commandments. After the destruction of the Solomon's temple, some people rumor that it is somewhere in. Some people search for it, etc. It's based on that testament. I want to go into that issue because it is somewhat related with what we're going to say in terms of theology. Let me finish what I was saying first. We can talk about that later. So in Islam, as in Christianity, it's a Semitic religion. It has a God, the God of Abraham, a personal God. It says a lot. This means a lot, but it requires a lot of explanation. There are such descriptions in Quran, the Holy Quran. Abraham looked in the stars, and decided that stars were the God. And then, well, the stars go away, and he said, no, the moon, the sun, they all change. And there's this expression, I do not like those things that sink, that go down. So he becomes a monotheist and breaks the idols. And even though the Jews believe in monotheism since Abraham, the Musavism, Moses, is the start. That's why it's called Musavism. Mohammedanism is the article that I mentioned by H.R. Gibb. Isavi, Musavi, and Mohammedi, which is like Jesus, those who believe Jesus, those who believe Moses, and those who are members of the religion of Muhammad. So, Moses, Isa, Jesus, and Muhammad. Now, this is so in the Semitic tradition, but Buddhism and shamanism, they do not have gods. It's a belief in shamanism. It's not a monotheistic religion. It's belief in spirits, which is still existent in the Middle Asia and some other countries. Animistic religions, they do not have in any of them a personal god like in the God of Abraham. In Hinduism, you don't have it either. It is a real source of mysticism. The actual original source of mysticism. So the Brahmanism is something else. It's different. I mentioned it before. Biruni interpreted differently. That's another issue, but religion. Let me say it for our religion. It's 570 and 620, 630. It's 40. I don't know. I missed the number. So that's my estimation, my guess. So they try to celebrate his birth, but because calendars are different, there are some problems. It's not like that because there are differences in the calendars. There are also other detailed topics, but it doesn't concern me at the moment. But most reasonably, it's between 570 or 80. Came to the world like. And he became a prophet in his 40s, when Gabriel, in his age of 40, Gabriel revealed the Quran. He became a prophet. So there's a 12-year period of Mecca and Medina, according to what is narrated. This is very interesting because the calendar was accepted in the time of Omar, the solar takvim, the Hijri takvim calendar. So I don't know, it's like somewhere in 1400s according to the Hijri calendar. The Miladi calendar, the Jesus calendar was Christian calendar, was first proposed in the 8th century. So actually Hijri calendar is 1 century before the Christian calendar, because the Christian calendar was proposed later. Probably they had some Jewish or Salafi and other calendars. These are very contentious issues. These are historians' matters, not what we're talking about here. But let's not forget that. So the Quran used the moon calendar. So some commercial reasons for changing the calendar has been criticized in the time of Hajj. So sometimes it may be important, but anyway. So the 0 is somewhere around 622, as some people have pointed somewhat arbitrarily. So Islam begins around 622. So when did the scientific Ilmi Kalam began? So it's the time of after the Umayyads, it's the Abbasid Caliphate, Khalifa, and also the Hadith. Historianism as well, historiography. So the contemporaries of Prophet Muhammad, there's not much other than Quran that can provide as evidence. So the earliest historianism. People are curious, of course, what kind of person was Prophet Muhammad. So the earliest historianism is the Siyar books, the time of Abdulaziz, 100 years after the Hijrat, the pilgrimage. These are things that developed afterwards, but Orthodox theologians, so they're not contemporaries, but there's also such an issue. They started doing something different in the time of Omar. Zoroastrianism, Christians, and other religious members, they encountered these members and they had some discussions. I will not go into the details. As a result, they have encountered ancient Greek heritage and other cultural heritages. So these debates come out from these encounters. So the extreme dependence on Aristotelian logic, staying within the bounds of reason and trying to put Quran within the bounds of reason. There are some rationalized Quran. So there are some tawil, just like rationalize and try to apologetic attitudes and try to rationalize Quran. So where did they learn it from? They learned it from the Aristotelian logic. Where did they learn it from? They encountered in the Abbasid times the Dar al-Hikmah, the door of wisdom, and some Syrianic Jews and translators translated the ancient Greek, whatever they are found. Some ancient philosophy has been translated into Arabic, and that's where they have learned about these rationalization. And the Yohanna, in the time of Muawiyah, from Damascus, wrote in order to, whether Jesus was the Son of God or not. Johanna wrote a Bible, but if you want to discuss with them, you have to use their language. He knows philosophy. If you don't know, then it doesn't work. So you have to learn their language. But in the end, this ended up with refusing those things that were refusing those things in Quran that was not according to logic, but trying to rationalize them. Trying to rationalize and get them accepted rationally. So the Orthodox believers, the Orthodox theologians, try to fit Quran in the Aristotelian logic's narrow confinements, because we know now that the Aristotelian logic is incorrect in the world image, and in my conference called World Image. So you can go into the Library of Islamic Research. You'll find it in there. In the library, you can find it if you search for it on the internet. The image of Islam in the world and the future of humanity. If you search for this, you'll find it. In conclusion, I mentioned for 20 or 30 years ago in there, like that. They tried to confine Quran in the narrow confinements of Aristotelian logic. But you say that God exists and it can be proved, and it's the reason why things exist. You can come to this conclusion or that conclusion, and you try to come up with a philosophical doctrine and try to build, and you call it kelam, logos. You try to make it like philosophy, but when you're doing this, when you're in this activity, you use logic during this process. You do your own logic, and you do too much respect to logic. Even Ghazali was inclining towards mysticism, in Baghdad. Religious leader, and then when he went to the desert as a hermit, he wrote a kind of autobiography. It is called it's a very tiny book. It's called Al-Munkiz Dalal, to warn those. It seems like Ilmi Maymun's history is the same. Delalut Al-Munkiz Al-Dalal, trying to get away from evidence, I think. Some Arabic words. This translator's note. So, logic is not. You just have to accept logic as it is. You do not discuss logic. This is the exact opposite of what I said now. Logic is, according to Ghazali, the criterion of truth. But is it really so? For 2,000 years, Aristotelian logic has been the sovereign until it has been disproven. Yes, true. Even today, according to my conclusions and opinions are different, but when you delve deep into it, you get to some contradictions. So like in St. Augustine and Thomas and Ghazali, is in a rational, and other Orthodox theologians try to rationalize theology. Let me also add this now that I've remembered it. Even though Ghazali thought that way, there are also those who oppose Aristotelian logic. We know that too. Ghazali, he writes like that in Munkiz. So there were others who oppose it too. So you believe that God's existence can be proven. Now, this is a very long issue. I will extend the conference a little bit, but for example, St. Thomas or Augustine. The Church and West's scholastic theologian. Scholasticism means to discuss theology with its philosophical grounding, with the grounding of a philosophy. With philosophy, art, and religion is a composition of the three in the medieval ages. So these guys used Aristotelian logic, reasoning, and discussed the characteristics of God, the nature of God, and they discussed the religious matters. So they rationalize faith. Although faith is like this, Prophet Muhammad said, "I am being revealed this Quran." People believe him. People write what he said, and that's it. That's belief. It has got nothing to do with reason or logic. This is something that came up later on with exposure. The law, theology. So it takes time to develop. Of course, it doesn't just build up instantaneously. So after a long time, these things arise. So it developed theology to some degree. Can be applied to some degree. You cannot leave aside a developed theology easily. Sufis consider theology unimportant, but they are like our allies and if generations have built such an advanced theology, you cannot just put it aside. You cannot ignore that. There's an advanced theology there, yes. Institutionalized, formalized. It has a madrasa school. And someone like me might say you cannot confine it to the limits of Aristotelian logic, but you cannot even discuss religion with logic. Not just for Islam, but in generally. Starting from biology, logic is insufficient. That's my, I'm a different radical philosopher. That's my understanding, but that's a different matter. That's a different issue, at least. To what degree is it true? Is it okay to confine religion to the limits of our solely Aristotelian logic? You can discuss that. I can also give other resources for this. The revelation in the modern world. There's a book like that, and there are some interesting discussions of it too. So there is also a mystical tradition. And it originally came up from India, Upanishads and so on. It's a very mystical religion, from the origin. Shamanism is also mysticism. It's a very old tradition. In Islam, in the Abbasi period, approximately. So there's a well-developed understanding. They take it to other sources in history, but however, since although this is a 7th century issue in Islam, there are also Christian Gnostics. Gnosticism is the same meaning with mysticism in the sense. So I wrote, if you remember, Gnosis Althon means know yourself in the Delphi temple in Greece. Noscete ipsum in Greek, Latin. Gnosis auton. Know yourself. There's a nice word about that. Nice. If you know yourself, you will know your God. So knowing yourself is not an easy matter, as it seems. Especially in mysticism, there's a lot of details about this knowing yourself issue. When we say nefis, let me remind you that what was the Yunus? Don't call me. I'm not me. There is a me that's deeper than me. The nefis, the life inside of us, that's characteristic. And in my divan poem, in the beginning of the divan, a pause or signature. So in my divan, the infinite self within you. There's an infinite self within you. And as the Brahmin priests call it, this issue of identity or self, this issue of self. Pause for signing a book. I'll try to find that line about the infinite self within you. This matter of self is a long issue. It starts with the Moses in the Mount of Sinai. Moses is interesting from 2 points of view. The infinite self and also about the infinite self and identity. They can both be found in the mirror of Moses. So Moses considers himself a prince and then he finds out about his origin. And because of that, he is put to exile. And when he was a shepherd, he sees a fire in the Mount of Sinai. There's fire, but there's no smoke. He goes to take a look. As told in Torah, very lively. And God talks to Moses in that. So tells him to take off his shoes because you're in the Holy Land. Anyway, in that part, Yehovah gives him a task. So they have suffered enough and go, relieve them. But who am I to tell them, order them? What should I tell them that has sent me? Who are you? Who should I say has sent me? And in the Latin translation, I have used it. Dixit Deus ad Mosem, ego sum qui sum. This I am who I am has a lot of interpretations, but one of them is the identity. It is what it is, not something else. So, but I am what I am. In Hindu mysticism, I am I. It says I am I. As you know, Enel Haq, he said like I am God. There are some things that actually in that literature, and if you discuss it with detail, it's very, very interesting. But requires high understanding. The lay people, it's not simple enough to be discussed by the lay people. This category of layman includes some specialists, though they may have titles, because they see it from a single perspective, doesn't know about the other disciplines, doesn't understand, is not familiar. He just the perspective of an intellectual, of a specialist. To what degree can you comprehend and grasp the matter, and as if you need Sophia knowledge, wisdom yourself, and you're trying to teach others as if you know. Look at yourself, whether on terms of fiqh, law and kalam. Are you really sufficient, adequate? Look at yourself and evaluate yourself first. You must be modest a little bit. This is not enough. The Islamists have made the worst influence on Islam. They want to propagate Islam. They consider themselves, all Muslims consider themselves to be the propagators of Islam, and they all talk about Islam, this way and that way. Like, what do you know about the history of Islam? What do you know about Islam? Like, come to your senses. It's beyond what you can discuss and talk and know and learn. Even if you're a philosopher of history, this is not enough. Human understanding is limited to. It's not as easy as you think, I'll say, but I say, but there's no point, there's no use, because this, even though I try to explain it here, we haven't even touched the surface without even doing the introduction. We have been speaking for 2 hours. So these are such matters of theology that he who can solve it, it's like congratulations to him who can get over it. It's not something superficial, it's something, if you dig the ground, you find even more. There are such issues here that by its nature cannot be discussed. For example, the matter of identity, selfhood. It's mathematics, philosophy, logic, theology, mysticism. There are such discussions that you have to be a genius in order to understand them, even to start reading those texts, let alone ordinary people's understanding. Even if I've seen such texts that, how can you tell this to the layman? How can you tell it to the layman? I don't want to. Yeah. We are already running out of time, but let me put it this way. In the Islamic culture, both groups, those theologians and Sufis, when they're criticizing each other, they are both right. Sufis are too relaxed and too tolerant. They had a lot of influence on extra Islamic influences on Islam. They have some superior sides, but some sides of them are criticizable. And the others are too static, too based on logic, rational. If you look at that article, it's written for a normal understanding, general understanding. It's not, it is well exposed, it's a nice exposition, and it's quite true. Those conclusions are true, in my opinion. So, this, if you're a member of a sect or a theologian, even if you look at this as a digression from Islam, those who criticize each other however, unfortunately, the understanding and knowledge of people in our country is pretty low, and then it becomes a very superficial and tasteless discussion of theology. In order to talk about this in a high level, you need some really great men, and we cannot raise them. We couldn't. It's not a productive culture. Our culture. So, with a limited understanding, there's no point. There's no sense in discussing these great problems and issues. That's how I want to conclude. So, some things are beyond human understanding, even, and cannot be explained. And you, with your simple logic, let alone logic. Like I criticize intellectuals for not knowing logic. What do you know about logic? Have you studied logic? Let alone the intellectuals, even the specialists on logic do not understand logic. It's so vast that nothing is so easy. There are so many types: fuzzy logic, multi-valued logic, and different types of logic. There are modal, Aristotelian, and many different types of logic. So, even professors of logic cannot comprehend all these issues of logic, as there is no universal polymath mathematician. The last universal mathematician was Poincaré. Even the smallest issue in philosophy is logic, and even that is too vast. Science has expanded greatly. It's not like in the medieval ages. Today we are talking about things that we don't even understand at all. It's better if you don't judge so much. I would like to discuss at length, but this is a never-ending topic. So, mysticism and theology. It has to pass through the sieve of philosophy of history for the. That was the point in criticizing these disciplines. So yes, you believe, we understand, you have a faith, but this is not an issue that's so simple. That's number one. And secondly, even if you are the best in this field, you cannot express reality with only your perspective, theology. Physics, chemistry, art. So what can you tell about art from a perspective of theology or philosophy? What will you understand? What do you know about philosophy, for example, or what will the philosopher understand from theology? It's all about language, talk in philosophy. It's just like even the scientific knowledge and the material knowledge is not comprehended by philosophy. Philosophy is very limited. It's not like all-encompassing discipline that can talk about everything. And science can only relate and connect with the material world. They can understand the material world. And history doesn't even have a correspondence with reality. Let's know what things are like. Disciplines have limits. They are not all encompassing. They're not capable of encompassing all the truth. So, and you need all the disciplines, like as in philosophy of history, and then it has another advantages and disadvantages. Even if you go deeper, we are going to come to points you would not understand, so let's suffice it to finish with this. the bouquet is being delivered.
Hakkınız olacak. Teşekkür ederim.
It's the first time they're delivering flowers.